Hi, welcome to the All Things LGBTQ interview show, where we interview LGBTQ guests who are making important contributions to our communities.
All Things LGBTQ is taped at Orca Media in Montpelier, Vermont, which we recognize as being unceded Indigenous land.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hi, everybody. I'm here today with two science journalists, a distinguished pair, who have an interesting project that I think we all need to hear about. Let me start by welcoming you to the show, Miles Griffis and Betsy Ladyzhets.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
It's great to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Betsy, let's start with Betsy, who is a science, health, and data journalist. She's an independent journalist and writer working at the intersection of science, health, and data investigative reporting based in Brooklyn, New York. She's the co-editor and co-founder of the Sick Times. You work part-time still at the Council for the Advancement of Science Writing?
Oh, that's a little out of date as of the last couple of months.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I need to update my website. That's my bad.
Oh, that's okay. Your work is currently focused on COVID-19, long COVID, and the future of public health, with a particular interest in surveillance systems, government accountability, and the people left behind by the so-called end of the pandemic, a really important topic. You're also passionate about educating your fellow journalists, building community, and promoting data literacy and accessibility. You graduated from Barnard College in 2019, and I'm happy to observe that because I too am an alum, although I graduated many years before you. You had a dual degree in English, official concentration creative writing, and biology, unofficial concentration on loving trees. Outside of data and writing, much of your energy is spent biking around the city, over analyzing movie scores. I know we won't talk about the Oscars, maybe. I'm wondering when the next C train will arrive. Now, Miles, an independent journalist and writer, an award-winning independent journalist based in Los Angeles, California. Miles covers the Southwest, health, and queer issues, and I've read some of your writing that isn't about long COVID, and it's really fabulous. Your work has appeared in High Country News, the New York Times, National Geographic, Outside, Popular Science, Them, Vogue, Vox, Wild Sam, and many other publications. You were selected a finalist in the Sewanee Review's 2020, 2022, and 2023 nonfiction contests, and we're Facebook friends, and I remember observing that. Very impressive. You're the co-founder with Betsy of the Sick Times, a new website covering the long COVID crisis. Outside of your writing, you have worked as a background guide in Colorado, Canada, and Australia. You also volunteered as a wildland firefighter. You're at work on a memoir about long COVID and climate change in the Mojave Desert. You have a retreat there that I was lucky enough to visit on my last trip to California. You recently recognized as a finalist by the 2024 Ellen Malloy Fund for Desert Writers. So welcome again to you both. You're very distinguished.
Thanks,
Let me ask you from the beginning, if you wouldn't mind, what led each of you to journalism and science journalism in particular, starting with Miles? I'm a retired English teacher, so I call on people sometimes. Hope that's not a problem.
That's all good. Thanks so much for having us. Yeah, I think what led me to journalism and science journalism, I've always been really interested in nature and the outdoors. So I loved covering just like biodiversity and the natural world. And then as I started to grow up and see more problems that were happening to our ecosystems and our communities outside, it became pretty clear that climate change was important to cover. So I think that was sort of my into journalism. I was just really curious about those questions. I studied some science and biology in college. And I liked the idea of being a scientist, but I liked journalism allowed me to tackle a lot of different things and sort of drop into these different areas of expertise and speak with people across a wide spectrum of expertise. So I love that. Um, and I think, yeah, that was sort of my in. And then I just sort of developed over time as a freelance journalist, writing for different publications and just getting more specific in my beat, and eventually covering like queer ecology for High Country News, with my column. And then after developing long COVID, covering health and um, science from a different angle, with Betsy.
You grew up in Colorado, right?
Yes, that's right.
Navigating the fords. I remember reading an article a long time ago about going um, paddling, not paddling. See, I don't know much about nature, obviously, but it was high rafting, high water rafting, I think, maybe with your
Yeah.
mother.
Yeah, I love river trips. So I did a lot of those before I got on COVID, and I've been able to do some since. It's a kind of a more accessible way to get outside because you can just sort of let the river take you and you don't have to exert much energy. So it's been a good way for me to maintain getting outside.
Betsy,
Yeah, so I think kind of similar to Miles and probably a lot of other science journalists who I know, I studied a bit of science in college. As you'd mentioned, I had a double major in biology and English. And so I had the opportunity to do a bit of research and kind of realize that wasn't so much what I was interested in. And I also was involved with student journalism a little bit at school. I was on the editorial board of one of Columbia University's student news outlets for a couple of years, and so just got really interested in that. And I enjoyed covering science as a way to like not be so super focused on one project, but learn about and cover different things and talk to people with different expertise. I think it's just constantly interesting thing to be doing. So it's very yeah, satisfies the curiosity in a way that I always enjoy, even when I'm writing about less even when the topics that I'm writing about are not so positive, I guess, as is often the case these days.
well, I always thought of journalists as being so well informed. I mean, what a great field. You're constantly learning, you know,
Yeah.
and you seem to be pursuing that with a passion and an enthusiasm. Um, so let's go to long COVID. What is it, and how did each of you become involved with it?
Yeah, so long COVID is a umbrella term for basically health issues and new diagnoses and symptoms that follow a COVID-19 infection. It's very common. Um, there are pretty high percents. I think it's around right now, the most recent data before it was taken down is saying that about 7-ish% of adults have long COVID, and a few million children with it. So estimates are around 20 million Americans with it. And around the globe, according to a paper in Nature, there's about 400 million people with long COVID. So this is a huge issue all around the world. It can be a very disabling disease. Um, so for me personally, I'm now identified as disabled from my infection almost over 5 years ago now. It was in early February. Um, so when that happened, I just got these very strange symptoms. Sort of the narrative at the time was that if you are younger or quote unquote healthy, you will recover within 2 weeks. And people with long COVID challenge that, through March and April and May in the summer of 2020. And now a lot of us still have long COVID 5 years later. Um, so it can be, I think, it can be a disease that lasts for years and likely a lifetime without medical intervention. And we've also seen the CDC release data, and within our community, we've seen that long COVID can also be fatal. Um, So we call it, a lot of people with long COVID call it a crisis. Our newsroom acknowledges that as well in our mission statement. And in many ways, it's being overlooked. So as after I developed it, I wanted to know more about it curiously as a journalist, both just as a topic, but also it impacted me personally. Um, so I began documenting my experience with it and then reporting on it. And then a few years later, Betsy and I launched the Sick Times to specifically cover it because we didn't think that it was being covered as with the vigor and um, just attention that it needed.
Well, and being able to talk with you has really raised my awareness. And I was looking on Sunday, there's a Vermont, a publication called Vermont Digger, statewide, that reported that they're no longer gonna report on COVID results. And it wasn't even clear whether they were gonna report on COVID deaths. So,
Yeah.
it's going on, and we'll get to the national
Yes.
scene before we finish talking. But Betsy, how did you get involved with it?
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, I graduated college in 2019, so I was still at a very early career position when the pandemic started, and I've lived in New York City for a long time, so I was here during the really intense and awful first wave. And at the time, I was working at a small newsroom that focused on data journalism, but I happened to be the one person there with a bit of a science background. And so I was kind of pushed into slash volunteer, maybe a combination. I was doing a lot of the COVID coverage for them. I also started volunteering for the COVID tracking project, which was a volunteer effort in the first year of the pandemic to help fill in gaps from the CDC and other public health institutions in collecting COVID data, mostly compiling information from state and local agencies, and then kind of sharing it out in a way that was more accessible than what government institutions were doing. So I just got very, very involved with that, like pandemic reporting stuff. And later in 2020, I started a newsletter and blog where I was writing about mainly COVID-19 data, and then transitioned into freelancing a bit later. So for a couple of years, really my main beat was COVID-19 data and surveillance, public health, like related public health topics. And I, of course, had been following long COVID stories from 2020 when I started to see the first publications about it. Particularly, I think Ed Yong always comes up a lot as somebody who worked at The Atlantic at the time, and I think he really helped to sort of raise national attention about it fairly early on by starting to cover it. Um, and so I started to cover it myself with a few stories, and I think it just became increasingly clear to me that there was a real need for, as Miles said, like rigorous reporting that not only treated long COVID like medical curiosity, which there have been thousands and thousands of papers about this at this point. It's not really accurate to say it's like mysterious, but um you know, we saw this need to cover it from the perspective of the people with the disease, the people who are in this community, and to write about stories in such a way that we are really highlighting what folks are dealing with, how they can advocate for themselves, rather than the sort of mainstream media perspective that often would treat long COVID as like interesting medical news, but not really like center those perspectives so much.
So how did you meet and happen to co-found the website, The Sick Times?
Yeah, we met online just through social media. We would, we slid into each other's DMs and we're talking about different
Yeah, story
different
ideas and stuff like that.
story ideas, like editors that um, we enjoyed working with that would take on stories on long COVID. Um, yeah, I mean, being a freelancer and reporting on long COVID was very difficult. Like people like Ed Young really helped, I think, set the stage so we could do it. But even then, it was still really difficult to um, do stories. And then once you did, it was hard to like a lot of the times you would be spent sort of, at least for me, going back and forth with an editor about like sort of pushing back on how they might be minimizing long COVID. And it just became too time consuming because I was fighting with these editors who would, yeah, I mean, I was living with the disease. I was really well connected, and they had, usually didn't have as much experience. So it was, we sort of just dreamed, I think, yeah, like 2022, we met for the first time.
Yeah.
Yes. And we met in person, and we just sort of like dreamed about what it would be like if we had our own publication, or like, you know, if what it would be like in a world where you could report on long COVID and it'd be much easier, and you could, we had all these story ideas. So then in 2020, the summer of 2023, Betsy reached out to me with the idea to start a publication that was focused just on long COVID. So I said yes immediately.
Yeah. I was very grateful that Miles was like immediately on board because I had been doing my own blog and newsletter for a couple of years at that point, so I had a bit of experience with the sort of independent creator or like independent newsroom sort of world. I also in 2020 to early 2021, I did a program at CUNY's journalism school. It was like an entrepreneurial journalism program that was really helpful for me in like gaining some of that skills. But it's exhausting. First of all, it's exhausting to do this sort of thing you're on your own. And I thought having a small team would be a vast improvement. And also, I don't have long COVID myself, and I knew it was really important to have someone who did to sort of bring that perspective and just like be central to the voice and the editorial decisions of the publication. So, um, yeah, really glad that Miles was up for that. And now, of course, now we have a small team, and that is a central perspective of like everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of the team, you have 4 people on the editorial team and 4 on the advisory board. How did you all happen to come together? It started out with the 2 of you, right?
Yes. So in the spring of last year, we were lucky to get a major grant from an organization called CanRo. It's a biotech giving fund that has supported a lot of long COVID research. And so we were lucky to get a grant from them to help expand our newsroom. And so that allowed us to basically bring on 2 more people in part-time roles. And so we put a job application up. We were honestly pretty overwhelmed by the number of applicants. I think we had a sense that there was a need for this, but we put up an announcement around the same time, both saying like we have these 2 new part-time roles that we're hiring for, and also we're open for pitches because we were able to expand our our capacity to work with freelancers. And just the volume of emails we were getting of people who have long COVID or have related diseases and wanted to contribute was really incredible. So from there, we were able to, narrow down the pool of applicants, do interviews, all that normal kind of stuff.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
But exhilarating to have all those people express interest right
Yes.
off the bat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Miles. You want to say
Oh, yeah.
something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we ended up hiring a podcast producer. So we have a podcast weekly. And then we have a engagement editor. So Heather Hogan is our engagement editor. And James Salonga is our podcast producer.
I have to say your podcast is really a work of art. It's so impressive.
Thank
And
you.
I encourage our audience members to tune into it. You can find it by going to thesicktimes.org, and then it's called Still Here.
Yes. Or if you search Still Here or The Sick Times on your podcast app of choice, you should find it pretty quickly. But yeah, all credit to James. They're a great producer and editor.
And I especially like when you get to the research part, there's like heavy music. Research.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And
Yeah.
the musical component, and you find experts. I mean, that was going to be another question. You seem to have, like an expert segment and research and all kinds of information packed into a half an hour, which is really impressive.
Thank you.
So tune in to Still Here, audience members. Let's ask another pertinent question. Let me ask a pertinent question. How is the LGBTQ community affected by long COVID, would you say?
Yeah, so we have seen through this survey system called the Pulse Household Survey. It's basically or was, right? Should I be speaking about it in the past tense now, or is it still going?
It's still going, but they removed the long COVID questions along with some other changes that were made for 2025.
Yeah, so it was basically just like a questionnaire that the federal government was doing, um, and this is how we found the 7% of adults with long COVID, and that's been very consistent over like the past 3 years that it's been going, at least the long COVID portion. Um, and then it also found that bi and trans people were particularly affected by long COVID. So I started to report on this for them in 2022. And yeah, I mean, basically, queer people are more likely to be affected by this health issue because of a variety of factors and stressors from homelessness to um, what was the other ones? Yeah, homelessness to um, I mean, yeah, difficult like health equity, difficulty getting healthcare, all these different things. We know that like the more stressed and like the more, yeah, just like different diagnoses you may have, it may make it more likely to get long COVID. So this made it, um, yeah, just like the more affected, and like we've seen this in other communities too. So like basically communities with less resources and less support are often more likely at risk of long COVID, and this includes community of colors. Um, and this is similar with many diseases, but with one is easy to catch as COVID-19 in a world where there are very few precautions. Um, More people are likely to get COVID-19 and then thus develop long COVID, especially when rates of it are already really high. So that's sort of one reason. It's a really complex issue, and scientists are still trying to find out more about it and why. But we know that it affects these communities, so it would be great if there was just more attention on it. And the other main thing that we've seen is that people with HIV may be at an increased risk of long COVID as well. Um, so I think this is really overlooked in the community. So I've written a little bit about this on the Sick Times, a few stories there. So definitely check those out as well.
This leads me to a question that maybe is obvious, but since I've become more aware of it in preparing for this interview, what are the particular challenges that you have to that you've that are facing you with this project, and how have you overcome them? And like when you were talking about the trans community, I was thinking of the extra stress and having to validate yourself constantly, and struggling just with telling people who you are, kind of. So I imagine you've had some pushback with this project, am I right? From people saying it's not real.
I would say maybe not as much as one might expect. Perhaps. I think part of that is because we're very clear about our mission, or like if you look at our social media or you listen to the podcast, you read our newsletter, I think it's immediately evident like this is for the long COVID community. This is for people who have this disease or people who've had a related disease. Like I know we have a lot of readers who have, say, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is also called chronic fatigue syndrome, and have been living with that for years and are now, allies to the long COVID community and have a lot of the same symptoms, a lot of the same challenges. And for people, a lot of our readers also are researchers, healthcare workers, caregivers. So there are people who like know what this is and appreciate having a regular news source to follow. We almost think of it like a local news publication, but rather than serving a specific geographic area, we're serving this kind of specific community of people around this disease. And so I think I think those readers have been finding us and we've been finding those readers. Of course, it's a bit of a challenge to start a new online news publication in our current media ecosystem. Social media, there's a lot of challenges just with like existing on social media right now and all that kind of thing. And I would say another big challenge is like we're a small team, of course, and there's just so much to cover. Like I think if we had 20 people, we would still have a hard time deciding what stories to do. We continue to get a high volume of pitches, and it can be really difficult at times to kind of narrow down to those like story ideas we can actually support with our currently limited budget. And also, covering some of these issues with the complexity that our readers really deserve is tough. We don't have the budget for like editing or fact checking as some of the major news publications do, but of course we do our best to ensure our work is of a high quality. Um, yeah, and also like covering controversial issues within the community sometimes can be tricky. But yeah, I think people are finding us, and so yeah, it's less of the sort of outside pushback and more of the trying to um adhere to our own like rigorous standards that we've set for ourselves.
That's really encouraging because I saw a couple of interviews that were conducted by someone who works with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I remember how they got terrible pushback when they were finally trying to declare and legitimize themselves as,
Yeah.
that. So I'm really glad to hear that you're not facing the same kind of outside pushback, or there's probably some, but that it's not debilitating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like we definitely, like on social media, if you post about long COVID in some spaces, you'll definitely receive a lot of pushback. Like people with long COVID experience that a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, and we push back, like I push back on a lot of like incorrect reporting on long COVID on social media. So like a common thing you'll see is like a big newspaper will say that long COVID lasts for like weeks or months. But we know that it lasts for at least 5 years and likely is lifelong. Um, so yeah, it's not to say that like there's not a lot of pushback against people with long COVID and other disabilities in the world. Like if we did this interview on like CNN, I can imagine the comments would be very different. Um, but
Yeah.
in our own space, we've definitely been able to find people and validate their experiences and report on the disease well. Like I think we've like in the past 3 months, just our Instagram has had over 3 million unique impressions.
My
Um,
gosh.
it's definitely a topic. I mean, that's just one platform. We have a bunch of different ones, but there's a lot of interest in this topic. So I think people we like to sort of slowly introduce people to it, having all these social media channels. We've done like resources to kind of help explain what it is for people, and different, things that can happen when you have long COVID. So I think that approach has helped, yeah, just kind of slowly introduce us and the disease more into the mainstream culture.
Don't you have a new feature called Essential Resources?
Yes.
Tell us about that. You're constantly doing new things. It's amazing. It's bing, 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 one new project after another. It's very impressive.
Yeah. So we did this project called Long COVID Essentials with an advocacy group called Long COVID Justice. And the idea was to really break down what long COVID is, other diagnoses you can get when you have long COVID, um, talk about how to avoid getting COVID-19 with, wearing a well-fitting respirator like an N95 or a KN94, increasing air ventilation in your home, or air filtration and ventilation. Um, and yeah, so we had experts in the field and patients give feedback on all of these resources. Um, and yeah, we were really excited to launch it, and I think it's been a helpful resource. And we link to them also in a lot of our articles, so we don't have to explain what long COVID is in every article because that would take up like 200 to 300 words every time. um, and so we hope that those resources can be shared. People have been sharing them in person, um, just sending them to doctors, to friends, to parents, just to slowly help them understand and break the stigma on long COVID.
How about the medical community? Have they been responsive? Medical community writ large, I mean, it's a huge question and a huge field.
Yeah. Yeah, probably hard to answer because it's such a broad group. We definitely have healthcare workers who are readers, folks who work with people with long COVID. Um, and we know that some of the resources, as Miles mentioned, like people have been sharing them with their healthcare providers. Um, I would say medical education specifically is something we haven't done as much of yet, but we definitely would be interested in it. And I hope it's the kind of thing where our reporting can be a helpful resource for those who are doing that.
It's a great service.
Yeah.
Well, when you were talking about responding on social media, I thought how exhausting this all must be. So let me ask you another question. What does your average work week look like?
Yeah, we publish a newsletter on Tuesdays. Um, so you can get that. It's free. Just weekly. It highlights like 2 to 3 of our stories each week. It links to our podcast. We give a Betsy writes a COVID-19 data surveillance sort of weather report that is really helpful and includes other diseases as well, like flu and bird flu and now measles, I'm sure this week or something. So
Yeah, probably. I need to write it after this.
as a lot of data goes away, it's a really helpful way just to know how high cases are. And so on social media, we flag them in different colors. Like right now, we're sort of in like an orange, we're coming down. And then also on there, I'll do research updates. It seems like there's been tens of, or thousands of paper, almost like over 10,000 papers on long COVID over the past few years. So stuff is coming out weekly. So I write a little like research update that includes three studies or clinical trials on long COVID. Um, so so we spend a lot of time preparing that. Then we record our podcast, which comes out usually on a Friday or a Saturday. Um, and then the rest of our week is spent, yeah, working on fundraising, editing different stories that are coming out, working with writers. Um, it's busy. We need we definitely need more resources and more people, but we're really proud of what we can achieve with our small team.
So is it like 9 to 5 or 8 to 8 or it varies?
It
Yeah,
varies. Yeah,
You don't have time for other projects, other writing, do you?
a little bit,
yeah, a
but
little bit, not as much. For me, it's definitely a taxing just with all of my symptoms and working as much. It's almost full time for me just because I work much slower now than I used to.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, we're getting to the place where we're both almost full time, and then our 2 other staff members are part time.
Mhm. Mhm. Just a labor of love, or are you able to give yourself salaries?
we do
Sure.
okay. Yeah, when we started out, it was fully like volunteer basis. But particularly the grant that we got last spring was really helpful in enabling us to start paying ourselves. And we also had a pretty successful end of year fundraiser in like November, December of 2024 that helped us increase our stipends a little bit, and we're working on more fundraising. We are a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News, which has been really helpful with all of that stuff, as we're both relatively new to like journalism, philanthropy, and all that stuff. They have a ton of great resources, and we like participated in Newsmatch for our end of year fundraiser, which is just, yeah, really, really helpful.
That's
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
That, as a part of that, we have. You asked about our advisors earlier, but we forgot to respond. We have to
Oh,
have
yeah.
like an advisory board that oversees us, which is really helpful and has been great. So on that, we have Ed Young, we have Julie Raymeyer, who was a longtime ME journalist and health journalist. We have Julia Vogel Smith, who is a
Julia Moore Vogel.
Julia Moore-Vogel, sorry, Julia Moore-Vogel, who is a researcher with the patient-led collaborative and other groups. And we have
Monica Verduzco Gutierrez. So yeah, Julia is on the research side, and Monica is a clinician who runs a long COVID clinic, and also both of them also have some lived experience with long COVID.
Well, when you mentioned grant writing and fundraising, that's a whole other job. Does your
It
advisory
is.
board help?
They help kind of keep an eye out for opportunities and stuff like that, but mostly it is all on us. So we're both
Mhm,
wearing a lot of hats.
mhm, mhm. Um, Let me ask you, Betsy, about the NIH's Recover program, if you wouldn't
Sure.
mind. I didn't know anything about it until I read some of your articles.
Yeah, so Recover, we will often refer to it as the flagship long COVID research program in the United States. It's received about $1.6 billion. With the initial funding came at the end of 2020. It was an allocation from Congress to set up this big long COVID research program. And then they got a bit more funding last year, like reallocated from other places in the NIH. And so it's obviously a huge effort. It's a lot of money, significantly more than has been dedicated to other similar complex chronic diseases in the past too. So not only people with long COVID, but others who are kind of part of this broader disease community have been very closely following this. And, my reporting has shown that the initial years of the program were sort of underwhelming, as one patient advocate called it. So a lot of the program so far has focused on what is called observational research. So kind of tracking what people are dealing with, different symptoms, impacts on day-to-day life, things of that nature. And trying to get a sense of like how many people have long COVID, what are the different risk factors for it. And so I think one big criticism of the program is that while that sort of research is helpful, it's also been done by a lot of other groups. For example, answering the question, what are the potential symptoms of long COVID? The Patient-Led Research Collaborative, which, as Miles mentioned, are one of our advisors is affiliated with, or a group of researchers who have long COVID. They did a paper back in like 2021 that listed a lot of potential symptoms, right? So, the research that Recover is doing, folks say that it's kind of largely replicating research from other groups, and perhaps the budget didn't have to be so heavy on that kind of research. Rather, people really want to see clinical trials. They really want to see specifically trials that could only be done with the weight and the resources of the federal government. So there's a lot of interest in, for example, trialing drugs that are currently out there on the market for other diseases, but that can be used for long COVID, and that many people in the community like are already using off-label. Folks want to see more larger scale clinical trials that will, if the results are affirmative, would help make it easier for folks to get these treatments and sort of help with their symptoms. And then, of course, folks want to see novel clinical trials. Both I and other journalists who follow this space have talked to researchers who work at like biotech startups who have what they say are promising drugs for long COVID, but that they have had a really hard time getting government support. And that is obviously a frustrating experience both for the researchers at these companies and for people with long COVID who some have been waiting for like 5 years at this point for novel pharmaceuticals. And yeah, it's just it's difficult to see the slow pace of this research when so many people are dealing with debilitating symptoms.
You
So
think the, you think the Recover program is gonna last, or is it gonna be defunded? Hard to
yeah, I
predict.
think that's a big question right now in terms of what's the future of that program and the future of long COVID research more broadly. I did do a story about this a few weeks ago, kind of looking at what the current status was with the Trump administration. And so far, my reporting found that it seems to be continuing largely as normal. There were a few reports of meetings getting postponed, similar to meetings of like other grants across and stuff like that across the federal health agency ecosystem. But things seem to be still proceeding. It seems like because this is all funding that was allocated previously, right? They're not like new grants that are being decided right now.
Mhm.
Also, this is maybe more detail than you need, but Recover was set up under like a specific system that's a bit different from your typical NIH grant process. And so I think part of that has allowed them to kind of keep stuff going. But of course, $1.6 billion sounds like a lot, but when you actually divide that down into all of the research that's needed, much more funding is needed over the long term. And so I think there's a big question of like, what are the chances for new funding right now? Um, Interestingly, during Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation hearings, a senator asked him about Recover and sort of asked him, like, hey, will you support the continuation of this program? And he said yes, but he's already gone back on other promises he made during the confirmation hearings. And as Miles reported recently, a Trump executive order led to this disbanding of a federal committee of people with long COVID or of like experts on long COVID that was supposed to be advising the federal government. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now and a lot of worry that there's not going to be as much future government supported research, or at the very least that it will be delayed for a couple of years. No.
I know, it's like the sword of Damocles.
Yeah.
See a lot of doctors, and one of them, I have telehealth appointments, not because I'm unable to get there, but because it's more convenient.
Right.
And one provider has stopped telehealth. They've all gotten memos, but some telehealth is continuing. I mean, it's just really turbulent times and scary
Yeah.
times.
I believe it's Medicaid covered telehealth. It's supposed to end, I want to say in April.
Well,
So,
they told me Medicare isn't going to cover.
oh, wow. Yeah.
So, um, one thing about what I perceive to be your growing movement is the patient involvement, which I think is, I thought maybe it was a legacy of ACT UP, but I think it's one extraordinary feature that needs to be celebrated. People who have it and people are given voice as opposed to a lot of medical movements in the past. I've heard interviews with you, and you express optimism, which we always like to hear. Miles in particular, I heard an interview with a journalist for the Rolling Stone. I don't know if you remember that, but she was very, I mean, it's all very great.
Oh yeah, with Elizabeth Yuko. Yeah.
Yeah, and you said, well, yeah, but I'm optimistic. So I was wondering if we could expand on that a little bit. Even
Yeah.
though the national scene is very dire.
Yeah, the national scene is definitely grim, and just sort of society's treatment of people with long COVID and who are trying to be make make take precautions from COVID-19. I think over the past 5 years, it's been amazing seeing how people with long COVID have named the disease, studied the disease, contributed to clinical trials, to research, um, just raised awareness, raised advocacy groups, support groups. Like, it has been an incredible effort from people who are very, very sick. A lot of them shouldn't have to be doing the work that they are doing, is something I always try to caveat that with. Like, this isn't one of those CNN stories about, the child raising lemonade funds to help his parents with X disease. It is something that people shouldn't have to do while they're sick. But the bravery of people sharing their stories against the stigma of long COVID has, I think, allowed millions of others to understand what they have, to speak up against it. And I think the movement just continues to grow, especially as these, as more cuts happen. I think it's important to remember that there are a lot of really incredible researchers and doctors who are working on this and taking it seriously. And while there might not be federal funding, there might be privatization of research. There are other countries that are also working on long COVID research. but yeah, the fight sort of continues of raising awareness, and I think we've seen that sort of just in our newsroom. Like this is just an issue that is not going away. We always platform, we do both reporting, so we have like features, where we'll report on different things, but we'll also have a commentary section, where we share different experiences from people with the disease, and we just show its effect. Those essays show the effects of long COVID on children, long COVID on families, relationships, the economy. Like it is just such an enormous crisis that I think um, society will have to address it, and address it well very soon, because it already has creeped into so much of our lives and society, and we see the effects everywhere.
One thing I do applaud too is the international scope of the website and of your podcast. So
Thank you.
optimism, Betsy. I was really actually encouraged by your remarks about the audience, that you don't have to fight and prove yourselves to the people, to your readers, that
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a tough time to put it mildly. As we're recording this, I just published a story that I worked on about people who have long COVID who work for various US federal agencies and are facing, one person was unjustly fired. A couple others are worried about that. People are having a hard time getting accommodations for things like working remotely. So obviously, this is really, really challenging moment for so many people. Um, but I think there is also a lot of opportunity right now. I think we've seen a lot of, people finding each other, finding community, and helping each other out. One thing we've been able to report on a decent amount is the movements of like grassroots organizations addressing the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So there are mask blocks, which is a type of group of folks who basically pool supplies to buy high quality masks in bulk and then distribute them for free to their communities. There are tons of these across the US and globally that have started in the last couple of years. There are also groups that are making air purifiers and other methods of like cleaning indoor air more widely available. Advocacy groups that are pushing back against harmful policies. Um, so, yeah, I think we have a lot of this kind of new infrastructure that is being built right now. Um, and, people kind of finding the information that they need, helping to keep each other safe. Um, I think all of that is by necessity, but is also kind of helpful. It's heartening to see it growing at this moment where it's so needed.
and the audience is primarily, who would you say your audience is?
A lot of people with long COVID, people with related diseases and disabilities, and their allies,
Mhm.
which includes folks like researchers, caregivers, people who are still themselves just really trying to not get COVID for whatever personal reason. Yeah.
Is your ally pool growing?
That's a good question.
The answer probably.
Yeah, kind of hard to answer, I guess, but
Yeah, I mean our socials continue to grow, which I think validates the importance of this issue, and um, especially just in the climate that we're in. I think that is really powerful, that um, people are finding our work helpful and that it is needed. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, one thing people with long COVID need is more allies. Like as I was saying, all these groups have done these things, and mostly themselves. Um, People who are so sick and can get worse from exerting themselves too much shouldn't have to be doing all of this work. So people with long COVID need solidarity from queer organizations, especially because it affects these communities more. This should like it's a scary topic, and I totally get that, but they need to address it. Um, yeah, HIV advocates, like all these other things. And there is a lot of solidarity within those groups, but within these like broader institutions, there's very, like I reported a story last year and I haven't looked into it since, but like a lot of HIV groups, even though long COVID can increase the risk, like you can't find the word long COVID once on those websites. So there needs to be sort of more just broader, I think in this time, just broader solidarity across issues. Um, there's just so much more power in groups coming together. So it would be great to see long COVID included in a lot of those conversations because it impacts all of those things, whether it's labor, workers' rights, sick leave. It affects women at higher rates. It affects, the queer community. It affects people of color more. So this is just something that really needs to be a foundational issue.
So what can our audience do to help you, to contribute to the cause?
To the sick times or like long COVID generally, I guess.
The sick times, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, read our work, sign up for our newsletter, listen to the podcast. All of those are great. If anybody listening to this is a journalist or works at a news organization, you are welcome to republish our articles. Everything on our site is Creative Commons, unless we're republishing from someone else, in which case that's, noted on the story. But yeah, any kind of sharing to help expand our audience, we really appreciate. And of course, if you like our work, if you find it helpful, we are taking donations. All our work is free, no paywall, so it's strictly optional, but we do appreciate it when folks have the capacity to do that.
And let me ask you for valedictory remarks, what would you like to leave our audience with this afternoon, starting with Miles?
Good question.
Covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think our society really, really likes to pretend that COVID is not an issue. And we see all the time, I've spoken with so many people reach out to me and have reached out to me over the years privately to talk about their long COVID experiences, but don't really share them publicly. There's huge power in sharing your experience if you are having it and trying to figure out what happens. Long COVID can be hard to detect, but usually if you have an infection and you have these symptoms that are lasting after 3 months, it's definitely worth talking to a healthcare provider and to trying to figure it out. It can just, yeah, I think a lot of people don't have a plan for what they do if they become disabled. They just kind of are thinking and trying to get by in life. And COVID can really disrupt your life for years. So it's definitely worth protecting yourself when you can. Yeah. So, I'm a big advocate for wearing a high quality mask in busy places. Your health is so important. And it's not worth a COVID infection.
Yeah. I think just adding to what Miles said, I think for those of us who are not dealing with long COVID at the moment, it's really important to step up and be an ally, to be sharing people's stories, to be, making yourself or spaces that you're part of safe for those folks, wearing masks, clearing the air, having events outside when you can, testing if that's available to you. All of these things really make a big difference. Like, I can't tell you how many times someone has thanked me for encouraging a mask requirement or encouraging testing for like different spaces that I'm part of, whether that's journalism conferences or like advocacy events in New York City. So I think, yeah, people are really looking for community right now. And if you are not making your community accessible to people who are trying to not get COVID or not trying to get sick with whatever else is going around right now, you're excluding a ton of folks. So I think that's just really important to keep in mind.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So Miles Griffis and Betsy Ladyzhets, thank you so much for joining us. And let me encourage the audience to find the sick times and read some of the articles and tune into the podcast. And I really appreciate the chance to talk with you. And we'll have to invite you again to get updates periodically.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. And until next time, remember, resist.